Emily Blake had everything she needed for a quiet life. The 28-year-old journalist, with her dark hair and slender frame, always looked put together, even on her toughest days. Her large brown eyes concealed a sharp mind, and her delicate features combined with a cold gaze often gave the impression that she noticed everything, even the things people would rather hide. Her job had always been about uncovering the truth, but this time she had chosen a path that was far too dangerous. A year ago, Emily stumbled upon a series of disappearances. People seeking psychological help or resisting family members mysteriously ended up in a psychiatric hospital, vanishing without a trace. Their relatives never visited, and the hospital issued reports of progress in treatment. But none of these individuals ever returned to normal life. Rumors of violence, abuse, and even death had circulated for years, yet no one had any proof. Emily decided to gather that proof herself. To gain entry, she devised a plan. Emily staged a paranoia attack, creating a scene right on the street. She ran down the road, looking over her shoulder and screaming that someone was following her, that she was being poisoned. When the police apprehended her, she rambled about having enemies and being pursued. Instead of being incarcerated, they decided to send her for temporary evaluation at the psychiatric hospital. It worked even more smoothly than she had expected. Within hours, she was admitted with hardly any serious screening. As the doors of the psychiatric hospital closed behind her, Emily felt as if she had stepped through a gate into another world. The air felt heavy here, saturated with dampness and decay. The narrow hallways, painted a faded green, were splattered with stains that may have once been blood. Ceiling lights flickered, casting shadows on the walls that shifted like living creatures. The doctor meant to meet her didn't even glance at the paperwork. He simply signed the form and shrugged. Another case of paranoia, just a routine matter. Nurse Angela, take her to her room. The nurse, a middle-aged woman with a vacant, cold stare, gripped her elbow tightly and pulled her through increasingly labyrinthine corridors. Emily felt her heart tighten. Every time she passed an open door to a ward, she saw faded faces of patients with lifeless eyes. Some rocked back and forth, while others mumbled incomprehensibly to themselves. One of them, standing by a window, suddenly turned and whispered **. You won't get out. No one gets out. Her room resembled a prison cell. A narrow bed with a metal frame and a mattress so thin that she could feel every spring, along with a small window in the ceiling that let in almost no light. The door didn't lock, but that only added to her fear. At any moment, someone could walk in. **. On her first night, she realized that the hospital operated by its own rules. In the darkness, muffled footsteps and a hoarse laugh echoed, as if someone was relishing something grotesque. Whispers seeped through the walls like the voices of invisible ghosts. **. Are you the new girl? Food for the queen. **. Emily bolted upright in bed, her hair standing on end. She didn't yet know who the queen was, but she already regretted asking about it in her thoughts. **. Suddenly, the door to her room creaked open. A tall figure appeared in the doorway. It was one of the patients, a man with disheveled hair and a vacant gaze. He stood still, staring directly at her. And then he began to laugh softly. **. She will come for you. She always comes. The man tilted his head to the side, as if trying to memorize her face, then silently walked away. Emily remained sitting on the bed, clutching her knees, horrified at the realization that there were no rules here. **. On the third day, she began to understand that getting out of here wouldn't be easy. The staff treated everyone with indifference or concealed cruelty. They could leave a patient strapped to a bed for an entire night, and no one would ask about it. Food was dispensed grudgingly, as if out of pity, and when Emily asked questions, she was met with mockery. **. The patients lived their own lives. Some wandered the corridors in circles, unresponsive to the outside world. Others acted aggressively. One night, Emily awoke to the sound of someone repeatedly banging their head against the wall in the next room. The screams echoed endlessly, sometimes mixed with laughter and weeping, asterisk asterisk. And everywhere, rumors about the Queen circulated. Patients said she controlled everything that happened in the hospital. At night, someone might hear her whisper or see her shadow behind the doors. She supposedly decided who would live and who would disappear forever. Asterisk asterisk. Emily knew she had to act quickly while she was still able to distinguish reality from nightmare. On the 5th day, the first attack happened. Emily woke up feeling as if something was pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The bed felt cramped, and the air was thick and sticky. She abruptly opened her eyes and met the gaze of a ghastly face belonging to a gaunt woman looming over her. Her hair was wild and matted, sticking out in all directions like a bird's nest. Dark circles under her eyes and a half-open mouth made her resemble a predatory beast. There was something feral in her eyes, something long since devoid of humanity. In her hand, she clutched a rusty knife with a serrated blade, stained with dried patches. "I'm the queen of this place, bitch. You think you can leave? No one is leaving," the woman hissed, leaning in so close that Emily could feel the moist breath on her face, reeking of rot and spoiled food. Her voice was harsh and unforgiving, like a knife thrust in a dark alley. The blade gently grazed Emily's throat, sliding just enough to send shivers down her spine. Her breath stopped, as if fear had frozen her lungs into a lump of ice. She felt that with just one wrong move, this woman would plunge the blade into her neck. "Everyone who wanted to leave is rotting under the floor. You'll join them too if you think you're clever," the woman said, her pale lips curling into a grotesque, sickly smile. She tilted her head to the side and paused for a moment, as if waiting for Emily to say something or try to defend herself. But she didn't have the strength to move. Only her heart pounded wildly and uncontrollably, making her ears ring. Emily tried to scream, but the woman instantly covered her mouth with a cold hand, pressing her fingers down so hard they dug into her jaw, leaving painful imprints. Her nails were dirty and sharp, like the claws of a beast that had been digging in the dirt for too long. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed somewhere in the hallway. A flashlight from a caretaker flickered outside the door, its hazy shadow sliding across the walls. The woman froze, her eyes widening so much they seemed like black voids. She listened intently and then suddenly recoiled like a wild animal, vanishing into the darkness as if she had never been there. All that remained was a lingering whisper, "I will return. You'll hear my voice in your dreams." Gasping, Emily clutched her neck, checking for any cuts. Her body trembled, and her head spun from fear and shock. She tried to focus, but waves of terror washed over her, making her thoughts murky and chaotic. At that moment, she realized that in this place, anyone could become a killer. Any person labeled a patient by the medics was a deadly threat. The bed no longer felt safe, and the darkness was just a backdrop. Something or someone lurked in every corner, ready to pounce at any moment. Slowly, she got up from the bed, her legs wobbling, but she knew that staying put was even more dangerous. The corridor greeted her with silence, but silence was never a good sign here. It felt heavy and tense, like the stillness before a storm. Suddenly, something rustled beneath her door. Emily jumped, staring at the narrow gap between the door and the floor. Someone had slipped a piece of paper underneath. Hesitantly, she approached and, nervously glancing around, bent down to pick it up. On the paper was a crude drawing. Her face, with long black lines flowing from her eyes like tears. Beneath the drawing, someone had neatly written the phrase, "You will soon be just like us." Emily clenched the paper so tightly it crumpled in her hand. Her head was spinning, her heart racing as if it were about to burst from her chest. Panic surged in her throat. Something was wrong. She knew they were going to do something to her in this place, and that something would be far worse than a knife or a drawing. Suddenly, a long, drawn-out laugh echoed from the darkness of the hallway. It came from multiple directions, as if the rooms around her had come to life. The laughter was hollow yet simultaneously unsettling. like the voices of those who had long since given up. Emily clamped her hands over her ears, but the sounds burrowed deep into her mind, making her hair stand on end. She felt like she was losing her grip on reality, that this nightmare wouldn't let her go easily. And then, in one corner, she saw movement. Something was slowly emerging from the darkness, low to the ground, almost crawling. Her eyes strained to see into the dimness, trying to make out the silhouette, and when she did, blood ran cold in her veins. It was a person, but twisted, with contorted limbs and a face that seemed stretched into a grotesque grimace. Its eyes glinted with rage and despair. "You won't escape either. They all stay here forever," the creature whispered, sliding closer. Emily bolted for the door, but her legs stumbled, and she nearly fell. Just in time, she burst into the corridor and slammed the door behind her, pressing against the wall, gasping for breath. She wanted to scream, to run, but she knew that would only draw more attention. Her hands trembled so violently that she couldn't even hold onto the crumpled drawing. She realized she was in a place where reality blended with madness, and each day was a fight for sanity that slipped through her fingers like sand. This was just the beginning. Every day, something unseen whispered in Emily's ear, promising her a painful death. "Your skin will be peeled off slowly, so you can feel every piece." The voices merged into a choral whisper that rooted itself in her mind like poison. Sometimes, she wasn't even sure if those words existed solely in her head. Patients wandered the halls like formless shadows, touching her shoulder, the walls, or her hair. "You're a spy," one hissed as if pointing at her. "Your food," whispered another, licking its lips as if she were part of some horrific banquet. The doctors and nurses were even more terrifying. They never looked her directly in the eye, and when she recounted the knife attack, a nurse merely smiled, as if it were just another silly complaint. "Everyone here has their own night queen. You're lucky to have woken up alive," the nurse said, her voice carrying a sinister tone, as if she knew something more than she wanted to say. Then the regular injections began. A staff member with empty eyes forced her to lie down on the bed, injecting fluid into her vein that instantly brought a sticky, unbearable darkness. Her mind was slowly unraveling. She could no longer distinguish reality from hallucinations. It felt as if the walls of the hospital were shifting, and shadows in the corners of the halls were watching her, whispering in her ear. She thought she heard her own screams locked behind the doors of neighboring rooms. She saw patients wandering around, squeezing their hands so tightly that their nails dug into their skin, but no one tended to their wounds. This place was slowly killing everyone who entered. One night, as she lay awake, something slipped into her room. At first, she thought it was another hallucination until she felt a cold knife touch her throat. The same woman with the knife stood over her again, her night queen. She leaned closer, and her stinking breath enveloped Emily. "No one escapes here alive," the woman whispered, lightly dragging the blade across her skin. "Your body will stay here, and I will keep your soul forever." Emily tried to scream, but the woman quickly covered her mouth. At that moment, the door to the room suddenly opened, and another patient appeared in the doorway, a thin man with empty eyes. He looked at the woman and whispered without a word. "She ordered it. The queen said you have to be cut so you won't escape anymore." Emily felt her body freeze with fear. She realized that these two were not just crazy patients. They followed their own rules. The woman nodded, and the man moved towards her with a rope in his hands. They were going to bind her, but at that moment, footsteps echoed in the corridor, and both vanished into the darkness as quickly as they had appeared. The next morning, Emily tried to tell the doctor about the night attack, but he merely looked at her with indifference. "I see the medications aren't working properly yet. We'll have to increase the dosage," he said dryly. Her words about the attack turned into just another symptom for the doctor, and her pleas were ignored. A nurse administered another injection, after which reality dissolved completely. She could barely remember who she was and why she was there. One time, she saw staff dragging another woman into the basement. That woman screamed, struggling, I'm not sick. You have no right. Someone will find out. Her voice echoed in Emily's head long after the woman disappeared behind the heavy metal doors. The next day, the woman was no longer on the patient lists. The doctors claimed she had never been there. Emily understood. That basement was a black hole from which no one returned. A few days later, a nurse with empty eyes approached her and threatened, "You better not ask too many questions. Otherwise, you'll end up there too. Forever." Emily tried to escape, but all the exit doors were locked. Her hands trembled as she scribbled on scraps of paper everything she saw and heard, hoping to gather some evidence. But each time she found something important, the documents mysteriously disappeared from her room. Someone was always watching her, as if studying when she would finally break. One night, when she thought she had grown accustomed to all the horrors, someone carefully opened the door to her room. Standing in the doorway was another patient, tall, with bulging eyes and a face twisted in terror. He held something in his hands. It was a small, headless bird that he placed on her pillow. "The Queen says your time is almost up," he whispered, then laughed, looking her straight in the eye. "You will be next." The bird on the pillow left a bloodstain that felt as real as her growing fear. Emily realized she was already on the brink of madness. But the worst part was that she couldn't even trust herself. Emily sat in the empty room, surrounded by found medical records. She realized these people should never have been here. They were kidnapped, held against their will, and the doctors had falsified their diagnoses. They were former activists, journalists, businesspeople, all those who had likely crossed someone's path. Each record told the story of a shattered life. And now, with this evidence gathered, she had only one chance: to escape and expose the truth. As Emily rummaged through the hallways, trying to find more proof, one of the nurses, tall and thin with cold eyes, suddenly stopped her. The nurse raised an eyebrow upon noticing a few papers in Emily's hands and scoffed. "I know people like you." Her voice was low and sinister. "At first, you think you're smarter than everyone else. You think you'll escape and expose us. But you know what? There used to be a lot of normal people here, just as stubborn as you. They had it all: careers, families. But over time, they all became just as insane as those you see around. And you won't be an exception." Emily felt her blood run cold. She turned on the recorder in her pocket and captured every word. The nurse leaned in closer and burst into a malicious laugh. "Everyone breaks here, and you will too. It's just a matter of time." Emily gritted her teeth and quickly backed away, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. Now she knew. This place was not just a hospital. It was a trap from which no one had ever emerged alive. She resolved that she had to escape that night. The escape. She planned everything down to the smallest detail. After the shift change, Emily hid behind a technical door that led to service corridors. She was breathing fast and shallow, knowing that every step could be her last. She managed to navigate a few hallways, but heavy footsteps echoed behind her. Someone was pursuing her. She suddenly turned around a corner and rushed into one of the rooms, hoping to hide. The room was dimly lit, filled with empty tables and folders. But what she saw on the wall made her heart freeze. On the wall hung photos of people reaching out to her for help. They pleaded for her to investigate because no one else would help them. All these people had disappeared without a trace, and now their faces hung here, crossed out in red marker. She stepped closer, unable to believe her eyes. Among the photos was her own face. 2 was crossed out. A chill ran down her spine. Someone knew she was coming here. This was no coincidence. She was next. "So, did you like the collection?" A hoarse voice croaked from behind her. Emily whipped around and saw the Queen, the same woman with the knife. Her eyes sparkled with madness, and a horrific grin played on her lips. "This is my territory. I am the queen of this place. I killed them all, and I will kill you too." The woman lunged at Emily with the knife in hand. Emily screamed and tried to dodge, but felt the cold blade plunge into her shoulder. Pain ripped through her body, and she fell to the floor. Blood streamed down her arm, and her breath caught in her throat. "Now you'll stay here forever." The Queen shouted, laughing with glee. Suddenly, staff members burst into the room. But to Emily's horror, they did not intend to stop the attacker. Their faces remained indifferent, and their gazes were cold. One of the doctors silently approached Emily and pulled out a large syringe filled with thick liquid. "Time to rest, dear," he whispered as another doctor firmly grabbed her under her arms. "No, don't touch me," Emily screamed, desperately struggling. But the needle pierced her neck, and the liquid began to spread through her body like poison. The world became blurry, and her limbs felt heavy. "Take her to the basement," the doctor ordered coldly. Emily felt her body betray her. Her arms and legs buckled. Her eyes began to close, but she fought against the drowsiness, trying to stay conscious. She understood. If they dragged her into that basement, she would never return. They dragged her down a long, dark corridor. The lights overhead flickered, and the sounds grew increasingly muffled. Somewhere deep within the hospital, the same whispers of souls who had never escaped echoed. Finally, they arrived at the heavy metal doors of the basement. The doors creaked open slowly, and the smell of decay and dampness hit her face. "Welcome home," a sinister whisper came from behind her. The last thing Emily managed to see before they threw her onto the cold basement floor was the shadows coming to life in the darkness. They were waiting for her, and this time no one was going to let her go. Emily opened her eyes. Her head was splitting with pain, and everything before her blurred. She lay in an old bed in a basement, bound by straps that dug into her skin. The air was heavy, saturated with the smell of mold and medications. Somewhere in the corner, a lamp buzzed monotonously, casting dim flashes of light on the shabby walls. Around her stood several people in white coats. A doctor with sad eyes approached and leaned over her. He wore a smile, but it was almost sympathetic, as if he felt sorry for her in advance. "You need to accept the truth, Emily," he said quietly. "You're not a journalist. You've always been here." Emily tried to protest, but her voice betrayed her, escaping as only a hoarse breath. The doctor showed her a medical card with her name. Emily Blake. Diagnosis: paranoid schizophrenia. Involuntary treatment: 5 years in the institution. "That's not true," she screamed. "You made it all up." The doctor sighed and pulled out an old Polaroid snapshot from his pocket. In it, she saw herself, but not as she remembered. Emily sat on a hospital bed, confused and pale, with empty eyes. In the background was the same room she was in now. "All the people you investigated, they never existed," the doctor said. "They were just shadows in your mind." She didn't believe him. She had gathered evidence. She had talked to patients. She had heard those whispers at night. But suddenly, everything began to feel distant, like a foggy dream. The doctor continued to speak while her mind wrestled with panic. "Remember your notes? Those voices you heard? They were your own thoughts reflected by your illness. You imagined it all to escape the painful truth. You are one of us, and you always have been." She trembled, trying to break free from the straps, but her body betrayed her. She couldn't move. The doctor pulled out a small folder and opened it, revealing several yellowed photographs. Among them were the faces of all those people who had begged her for help, the ones she remembered as victims. Now they sat on hospital beds in gowns with vacant stares, and suddenly she saw her own photo among them. In the picture, she looked like one of those who had long lost themselves. "This isn't true. This isn't true," she whispered. But the voice in her head began to betray her. Fragments of memories surfaced from the depths of her consciousness. Her own words, screams during episodes, nights spent under the watch of medical staff. She saw herself in the mirror, just as lost as those patients she had spoken to. What if the doctors were telling the truth? What if all this time she really was a patient? The doctor leaned closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. "No one ever came here, Emily. You made all this up. You're not a journalist, and you won't escape from here because you're already home." And then she realized she had no idea where reality ended and fiction began. The girl had already lost herself. "Every time you start over, but the ending is always the same," the doctor whispered. You come back here. You always come back." She was overwhelmed by an endless feeling of panic and despair. She screamed, struggled, but the world began to dissolve into a sticky darkness. The last thing she heard before her mind finally shattered was the laughter of the queen, echoing somewhere far away, deep in the basement. "Now you're just like us." The light bulb flickered one last time and went out, plunging the basement into complete darkness. And remember, some secrets are better left unexplored. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment about what you'd like to hear next time.